This is my true story. I never imagined that the woman I loved for decades would walk away and take everything we built together. She left me with nothing but silence and a broken heart. But months later, her own father came to me with a briefcase that changed everything. What was inside exposed her lies, her greed, and her downfall. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I spent most of my life building a foundation that I believed could never break. Every single morning before sunrise, I would rise from bed, lace up my old leather shoes, and head out to the same small workshop where I spent more than half my life working. The sound of metal against wood, the scent of paint and dust, the slow ache in my back, all of it reminded me that I was doing something meaningful. I wasn't working for fame or fortune. I was working for her, for the woman I once believed was my forever. When we married, we had nothing but love. We started in a small rented room, the kind where the rain leaked through the roof, and every winter night we huddled together under one torn blanket. Back then, we didn't dream about mansions or millions. We just wanted peace, laughter, and the feeling of belonging to someone who saw us as enough. As the years passed, I worked every single day without complaint. I took jobs that others refused. I stayed up through nights fixing broken chairs, building furniture, painting walls, and managing whatever work came my way. My hands became rough, my shoulders stiff, and my hair grayer before its time. But when I came home and saw her smile, all that pain faded. I thought love was meant to heal like that. I thought her happiness was the reward for my effort. Every meal we shared, every trip we took, every corner of our home, those things were my treasure. I didn't save money for myself. I saved it to give her comfort, to make sure she never felt the same struggles we faced in our youth. When the day came that I could finally buy land, I still remember the tears in her eyes. We stood there together, looking at that empty plot of soil, and I told her this would be our dream home. She held my hand and said she believed in me. For the next few years, I poured every ounce of energy into that house. Every brick, every nail, every door, my sweat was in them. I skipped vacations, ignored my own health, and turned down chances to rest just to make sure the mansion would stand tall. People in the neighborhood began to call it a miracle house, built not from money, but from endurance. It was valued later at $3.8 million. But to me, its true worth was in the memories, in the laughter that once filled its halls. She decorated the place with passion at first. I remember how she'd spend evenings choosing curtains and wall colors. We'd argue playfully about what looked better, the oak table or the marble finish, and she always won. I let her win because her smile was more precious than any design. When guests came, she'd proudly say, "My husband built this home with his bare hands." Those words used to fill me with pride. I felt seen. I felt like my years of silent work were finally recognized. I believed that as long as love stayed, everything we owned would remain a symbol of unity, not greed. But slowly, something changed. The warmth I used to see in her eyes began to fade. She started caring less about the love we shared and more about the value of what we owned. She began reading real estate reports, comparing houses, and talking about prices instead of dreams. I told myself she just wanted us to plan for the future, but deep down, I sensed something was breaking. Still, I ignored it. I thought devotion was about patience, about holding on even when cracks appeared. So I held on. I believed that a man should never abandon the woman he promised to protect, even when she started turning away. My love for her was not built on convenience. I didn't love her because of beauty, youth, or wealth. I loved her because I thought we shared the same purpose, to build something meaningful out of nothing. Even when she became distant, I continued doing little things that showed I cared. I'd make her tea every morning, even when she no longer thanked me. I'd fix the lights and paint the walls, even when she no longer noticed. I thought maybe she was tired, maybe stressed, maybe time had changed her rhythm. But no matter how cold she became, I stayed loyal. Because for me, devotion wasn't about what I received. It was about what I gave. Every evening, I'd sit in the living room and watch her walk past me without a glance. Sometimes she'd be on her phone for hours, smiling at someone else's messages. Sometimes she'd leave for long drives without saying where she was going. I didn't ask questions. I didn't accuse. I thought silence was strength, that giving her space would bring her back. I was wrong. But in those days, I still believed in the idea that people change, and love can find its way back if you don't let anger poison it. I worked harder than ever, not realizing that while I was building, she was planning something entirely different. That mansion, our so-called dream home, was supposed to be our safe haven. I remember planting the first tree in the front yard, telling her that one day we'd sit under its shade as old souls, reminiscing about how far we'd come. She smiled that day, but it was a hollow smile, one that I only understood years later. The tree grew, just as our house did, but the roots of our relationship had already begun to rot. Still, I watered that tree every morning as a ritual, a reminder of my faith in us. I didn't know then that someday I would walk past it for the last time, not as a husband, but as a stranger to my own home. Looking back now, I can say with certainty that devotion can be both a strength and a weakness. I gave everything I had, my youth, my time, my heart, my future, believing love was an investment that always paid back in kindness. But love, when placed in the wrong hands, can turn into a debt that never ends. I had no regret for working hard. My only regret was believing that sacrifice alone could hold someone's loyalty. She didn't want love anymore. She wanted luxury. And when a person replaces feelings with possessions, the bond that once kept them human starts to disappear. Still, I kept going. I fixed things around the mansion. I paid the bills. I smiled, even when I knew she barely looked at me. People often say that time heals everything, but in truth, time only exposes what was hidden. The more time passed, the more I saw the distance between us grow. She started attending parties alone, dressing in ways that no longer felt like us. She laughed with strangers, ignored the warmth of home, and treated me like a guest in the very house I built. But I said nothing. Because even when the world falls apart, a devoted man still believes that maybe, just maybe, one act of love will save what's left. And so, I stayed. I stayed through the silence, through the long nights when she didn't come home, through the mornings when she walked past me like a shadow. I thought I was holding on to love, but what I was really holding on to was a memory of the woman she used to be. Every wall of that mansion had her laughter etched into it, and I couldn't bear the thought of tearing it all down. I thought devotion meant standing still, even when everything else moved away. I didn't know that my stillness would become my downfall, because when you give your all to someone who sees your love as weakness, they start to believe they can do anything, and you'll still stay. I let her believe that. I let her think I was too kind, too gentle, too loyal to ever fight back. But life has a strange way of teaching lessons. Devotion may keep you quiet for a while, but when truth finally speaks, even the calmest hearts can roar without raising their voices. For now, I can only look back and say, every hour I worked, every tear I ignored, every sacrifice I made, it all led to the moment I finally understood what true strength is. Not in giving everything, but in knowing when to stop. It began slowly, like a quiet shift in the wind that you don't notice until the leaves start falling the wrong way. I used to believe that love could survive anything, even silence, even distance, even the temptation of a richer world. But love doesn't die in one moment. It fades, piece by piece, the same way a candle burns shorter every night. The first cracks in our marriage didn't come with shouting or fighting. They came with small, silent changes, the kind that make you wonder if you're imagining things, or if the person you once knew is truly gone. I noticed she stopped waiting for me to come home. There was a time when she'd stand by the window, her face lighting up when I walked through the gate. I'd see her waving, sometimes even running out just to help carry my bag. But those days ended quietly. One evening, I came home to find the lights on, the TV playing, and her nowhere in sight. I called her name, thinking maybe she was in the kitchen or garden. But when I found her, she was on the phone, whispering and smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. When she noticed me, she just turned her face away, said she was busy, and continued talking. That was the first night I felt like an intruder in my own home. Her laughter changed too. It wasn't the gentle, familiar laughter that used to fill our evenings. It was sharp, forced, and often directed toward things I didn't understand. I'd ask her what was funny, and she'd shrug or say, "Nothing." Sometimes she wouldn't even answer. Our conversations used to be full of warmth about our plans, our family, small dreams like buying a new sofa or planting roses by the gate. But gradually, our words became fewer, our silences longer. She began spending more time on her phone, checking messages late into the night and hiding her screen when I passed by. At first, I told myself not to suspect her. I didn't want to be that kind of husband, the one who doubts, who snoops, who breaks the trust he once promised to protect. I thought maybe she was stressed, or maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention. So, I tried harder. I took her to dinner, bought her small gifts, and told her I loved her. But every time I tried to reach out, it felt like my words bounced off a wall. She smiled politely, thanked me softly, and returned to her phone. I couldn't understand how love could turn into indifference so easily. There was one morning when I woke up to find her already dressed, makeup done, perfume on, heels clicking across the floor. She said she was meeting a friend for brunch. When I asked which friend, she said, "You wouldn't know them." And just like that, she walked out. The door closed gently, but the sound stayed with me all day. I sat in that quiet house and realized I didn't even know my wife anymore. I didn't know what she liked, who she met, or what she thought about. I was a stranger to the person I once called my home. Soon, our house, the one that once echoed with laughter and shared dreams, started feeling colder. Not just emotionally, but physically too. She'd keep the windows closed even on warm days, saying the air outside made her skin dry. She'd turn off the music I played, saying it distracted her. The scent of her favorite flowers disappeared. She replaced them with expensive perfumes that smelled nothing like her. Everything around me was changing. The colors she chose, the clothes she wore, the way she spoke to me. She became more formal, like a guest passing through, not a wife living with her husband. I noticed she began spending time with people I'd never met. She mentioned new friends with fancy cars, luxurious homes, and foreign vacations. When she spoke about them, her eyes glowed. Not with admiration, but with envy. She started comparing our lives to theirs, asking why we didn't travel as much or attend the same parties. I told her I didn't care about those things, that peace was worth more than luxury. But she only rolled her eyes and said I was too simple. That word, simple, hurt more than any insult could. Because for years, I believed simplicity was what made our love pure. There was one evening when I overheard her talking to a friend. She didn't know I was standing near the door. Her voice was calm, but cold. She said, "He's not ambitious anymore. He's just content." She laughed after that, as if being content was something to mock. I didn't confront her. I walked away quietly, pretending I hadn't heard. But something inside me cracked that night. It wasn't anger. It was grief. The grief of realizing that the person you built a life with no longer sees value in who you are. Days turned into weeks, and the distance grew wider. She started sleeping in the guest room, saying she needed space. I accepted it without argument, thinking maybe time apart would bring clarity. But deep down, I knew space was just another word for separation. She began hiding her financial records, locking drawers, taking calls outside. Once, I walked into the living room at midnight and found her burning papers in the fireplace. She looked startled when she saw me, but quickly said they were old receipts. I nodded, but the image stayed burned in my mind. Her habits changed too. She stopped cooking. The kitchen that once smelled of her favorite dishes turned silent. We started ordering food almost every night. I'd still sit at the table, hoping she'd join me, but she often ate alone or said she wasn't hungry. I'd finish my meal, wash my own plate, and go to bed in silence. There were no more good nights, no more take care, just silence. One afternoon, I found her in the living room, looking through old albums. I thought maybe nostalgia had touched her heart, that she was remembering our early years. But when I approached, she quickly shut the book and said she was just cleaning. Later that evening, I noticed those albums missing. They were gone, just like the laughter that once filled our days. The more she drifted away, the harder I tried to stay anchored. I began doing everything she once loved, hoping to remind her of what we had. I painted the walls her favorite color, cleaned the garden, even bought her flowers like I used to. But she barely noticed. The woman I once loved had become someone else, someone who valued attention from strangers more than affection from the man who built her world. Then came the spending. She started buying things we didn't need: designer bags, expensive shoes, jewelry that gathered dust. When I gently mentioned we should save, she snapped. "You worry too much about money," she said. "We have enough." But I knew the numbers didn't lie. I watched our savings shrink while she lived as if wealth could never end. It wasn't greed, it was obsession. She wanted to belong to the rich crowd she envied, and in chasing that, she lost sight of everything real. Sometimes I'd hear her on the phone, her voice softer than it ever was with me. The tone was unmistakable, flirtatious, secretive. My chest would tighten, but I wouldn't say a word. I told myself maybe I was misunderstanding. Maybe she was just talking to a friend. But the truth has a way of whispering, even when you try not to listen. Deep inside, I knew something sacred had already been broken. One day she came home wearing a diamond bracelet I'd never seen before. I asked if she bought it. She smiled faintly and said it was a gift. I didn't ask from whom. I simply nodded, walked to the backyard, and sat under the tree I had planted years ago. For the first time in a long while, I cried, not because I lost her love, but because I realized she no longer valued mine. From that day onward, I stopped trying to fix things. I went to work, came home, and lived as if we were two strangers sharing the same address. I stopped expecting her to greet me, to cook for me, to ask how my day went. My world shrank to small routines: watering the plants, polishing my tools, watching the sunset in silence. The mansion felt enormous, yet empty. It was a palace with no warmth, a structure filled with expensive furniture but no heart. I used to think the worst kind of pain came from loss, but I learned it's not losing someone that hurts most. It's watching them fade while standing right beside you. Every morning, I'd wake up and see her face, but the woman I loved was already gone. She was there in body, but not in soul. The light in her eyes that once made my days brighter had turned into something distant, cold, unreachable. Even the neighbors started noticing. They'd ask why she rarely joined me outside, why we never walked together anymore. I'd smile and say she was busy, that we were both just tired from life. But the truth was simple. Our marriage was only alive on paper. Inside those walls, two broken hearts lived under one roof, pretending everything was fine. I thought maybe things would change with time, that she'd remember the man who once gave her everything. But time didn't heal us. It only made her colder. She began traveling alone, saying she needed a break. When she returned, she carried new things, new clothes, new stories that didn't include me. I stopped asking questions. I stopped hoping. I stopped believing that love alone could save us. By the end of that year, I could feel it. Something final, something heavy, something that told me the storm was near. She wasn't just distant anymore, she was planning. I didn't know what yet, but I could sense it in the way she avoided my eyes, the way she spoke carefully, choosing words like someone rehearsing for an ending. And one morning, that ending finally came. But before that day arrived, before everything fell apart completely, I already knew the truth deep down. Our love had died long before the divorce papers appeared. The cracks had spread too far. What once was built on faith had turned into an empty structure, polished, expensive, but hollow inside. And still, like a fool in love, I stayed. Because even as she drifted away, I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, the woman who once looked at me with love would find her way back home. The morning of the divorce was quiet, too quiet. I woke up early, like I always did, made myself tea, and sat by the window where I used to see her watering the plants. The sunlight was soft that day, but it felt heavy. Something inside me knew it was not just another morning. It was the day everything we built together would finally collapse, not with fire or shouting, but with the sound of a pen scratching paper. When she walked into the room, she was dressed neatly, her hair tied back, her perfume strong and sharp. She looked beautiful, but in a distant way, like a stranger attending a business meeting. In her hand, she held a folder, neat, white, professional. I thought it was another one of her errands, maybe something related to the property. But when she placed it on the table and looked at me without emotion, I saw it in her eyes. This wasn't a conversation. It was an ending. She didn't have to say anything. I could read the truth in her posture, the way she stood straight, the way her eyes avoided mine. She opened the folder slowly, as if the act itself needed control. Inside were papers, official, stamped, and cold. I saw my name on the first page. The word divorce sat there like a blade. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had imagined many things in my life, failures, struggles, loss, but never this. Never her handing me the end of our marriage like a transaction. My hands trembled slightly as I touched the papers. I remember how surreal it felt. The woman I once promised forever was now asking for separation in print. No tears, no hesitation, no regret. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, almost rehearsed. She said something about how things weren't working, how we had grown apart, how it was better for both of us. I barely listened. My mind wasn't in that room. It was somewhere in the past, walking through memories of us building our life brick by brick. I remembered our first home, the small rented apartment with cracks in the ceiling. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I used to fix those cracks myself, joking that one day I'd build her a house so strong nothing could break it. I kept that promise. I worked every day, saved every rupee, and finally built the mansion she adored. Every tile, every wall, every corner had a memory. Our laughter, our struggles, our plans. And now, that same home was on the papers in front of me. She said she wanted the mansion. Not half, not shared. She wanted it entirely. Her voice was steady, like someone asking for something they already knew they'd get. I looked at her face and realized she had been preparing for this for a long time. I could see it in her eyes, the detachment, the confidence. She had already moved on emotionally, and now she wanted to move on financially. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. What was the point? Love cannot be forced. You can't make someone stay who has already left you in their heart. I could have fought for half. I could have hired lawyers, dragged her through court, exposed her lies. But what good would that do? I was too tired to fight for something that was already dead. So, I simply nodded. I took the pen, and with a trembling hand, I signed. When the pen touched the paper, I felt something inside me shatter quietly. No sound, no visible crack, just a silent break in the soul. She took the papers back, neatly folded them, and placed them in her bag. She thanked me softly, as if I had done her a favor. That word, thank you, echoed in my ears long after she left. Thank you. As if ending decades of love was a polite transaction. She didn't look back as she walked out the door. The sound of her heels clicking on the floor faded, and then there was only silence. The house felt larger than ever before. I sat there for hours, staring at the empty chair across from me. I thought of all the birthdays, anniversaries, and festivals we celebrated in that mansion. Every wall had seen our smiles once. Every corner had held our laughter. And now, it was hers alone. In the days that followed, I began packing my things slowly. I didn't have much to take. Some clothes, a few books, a couple of old photographs. I left the furniture, the art, the luxury, all the things that had meant so much to her. I realized how little I truly needed. The things that once made our life look perfect were nothing without love. The staff looked at me with pity as I left. Some of them had worked with us for years. They didn't understand why I was leaving the house I had built. But I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I had no anger, no revenge in my heart, just a deep sadness, like a quiet storm that never ends. The last thing I did before walking out was stand at the main door and look back one final time. I could still see her favorite curtains, the dining table where we once sat for hours, the staircase she used to decorate with flowers every Diwali. It was all the same, yet it no longer felt like home. I whispered a silent goodbye and closed the door gently behind me. I moved into a small rented apartment on the other side of town. It was nothing like the mansion. No marble floors, no chandeliers, no large garden. Just a single room with a bed, a chair, and a kitchen the size of a closet. But for the first time in years, I felt peace. There was no tension, no pretending, no distance. Just silence. Clean, honest silence. At night, I would sit by the window and think of her. Not with anger, but with sorrow. I wondered if she ever thought about me, if she ever missed the simplicity we once had. But deep down, I knew she didn't. She had moved on to a different world, a world of money, status, and appearances. I was no longer a part of her story. Some friends tried to convince me to fight for what was mine. They said it was unfair, that I should demand justice, but I didn't want to turn love into a court battle. I had loved her with all my heart, and that love didn't deserve to end in hatred. So, I let her take everything. The mansion, the money, the status. Let her have it. Because the moment she walked away, she had already lost something far greater. My trust, my loyalty, my respect. The newspapers called her success story a fresh start. They showed pictures of her standing in front of the mansion, smiling, her hair shining under the sun. She looked happy, radiant even. People congratulated her. They didn't know the truth. They didn't see the man who had built that house from nothing. They didn't see the years of sacrifice hidden behind her new beginning. But I didn't care for the world's opinion. I knew the truth, and the truth was enough. I learned that sometimes silence is stronger than explanation. When someone betrays you, you don't need to shout. You just need to walk away with dignity. There were nights when I'd wake up from dreams of the past, her laughter, our trips, our quiet dinners. I'd wake up sweating, realizing those moments were gone forever. But instead of bitterness, I started feeling gratitude. Gratitude that I could still feel something, that I could still love, even after being broken. As weeks passed, I grew used to my new life. I cooked simple meals, washed my own clothes, and learned to live without luxury. It wasn't easy at first, but it was honest. And honesty felt like fresh air after years of suffocation. Then one day, a letter arrived. It was from the court. Final confirmation of the divorce. No emotion, no note, just a legal statement. I held that paper for a long time, staring at it. It was strange how a piece of paper could summarize years of love and pain. I folded it and placed it in my drawer, not out of anger, but as a reminder of how fragile life can be. I didn't attend the final property transfer meeting. I didn't need to. She got what she wanted. The $3.8 million mansion. Let her have it. I walked away quietly, taking nothing but my peace. People think heartbreak comes from losing someone, but the truth is, heartbreak comes from realizing that the person you loved never truly saw your worth. That realization burns quietly, but deeply. Still, I never wished her harm. I only wished her understanding, that one day she'd realize what she traded love for. But life has a way of teaching lessons, and sometimes it teaches them when we least expect it. Little did I know, months later, her own father would appear at my door, and the story that followed would turn everything upside down. When the mansion door closed behind me, it wasn't just a house I left behind. It was a lifetime. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked away with only 2 bags and a heart full of memories that weighed heavier than any luggage. I moved into a small rented house on the edge of town, a place so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat echo in the empty rooms. The air felt different there, thinner, colder, as if every breath reminded me that I was no longer someone's husband. I had been reduced to a name on old papers, forgotten by the woman I once built my world around. Each morning, I woke up to the sound of my own steps on the floorboards. The mansion used to wake with laughter, with music, with her voice calling me for breakfast. Now, all I had was a small stove, a single chair, and a window that faced an empty street. I made tea for one and tried to get used to the quiet. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comforts. It was the kind that accuses, the kind that makes you remember every word you should have said, every sign you should have seen. The first week was the hardest. I kept setting 2 plates on the table out of habit. Sometimes I'd boil extra rice or pour a second cup of coffee without realizing it. Then I'd stare at that empty cup, watching the steam fade, and feel foolish for still expecting her to walk in. Old habits die slowly, and love dies slower. There's no ceremony for being forgotten. It just happens in the middle of an ordinary moment, when you realize no one is waiting for you anymore. I tried keeping myself busy. I fixed the broken clock on the wall, even though time didn't seem to move inside that little house. I planted flowers in cracked pots, just to have something living near me. I swept the floor twice a day, not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed distraction. Every creak, every sound, every echo reminded me of what used to be mine. Sometimes I'd look at my hands, wrinkled, rough, calloused, and think about how they once built that mansion from the ground up. Those same hands that laid the bricks now wash dishes in a sink too small to hold a dream. At night, loneliness became a person. It sat across from me, silent but heavy. I'd stare at the window, watching headlights pass by, wondering where everyone was going, who they were going home to. I had no one to talk to, no one to share dinner with. My phone stayed silent, no calls, no messages. The woman who once called me her strength had erased my number like it never mattered. And yet, even with the ache, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Love doesn't turn into hate that easily. It fades, but it lingers like smoke after a fire. Weeks turned into months, and I started to find comfort in the simplicity of my new life. There was peace in the routine, in the stillness, in knowing that no one could take anything more from me. I learned to cook my own meals, to fix my own clothes, to sleep without expecting a voice beside me. I read old books and listened to the ticking clock instead of arguments. I began to understand that silence, while cruel, was also a teacher. It teaches you who you are without others defining you. Sometimes I'd walk past the street that led to the old mansion. I'd stop at the corner, just far enough to see the gates but not the house itself. I didn't want to see lights inside or imagine strangers living there. That place had too much of me in it, my work, my laughter, my trust. I let it go physically, but part of me still lived there. It's strange how memories don't move out when you do. They stay behind, clinging to the walls like ghosts that refuse to leave. As days passed, I started noticing small joys again. The way morning sunlight hit the window pane, the way birds sang outside my little garden, the way tea tasted better when I didn't rush it. Life was slowly reminding me that peace didn't need luxury. Peace needed acceptance. I realized that losing everything had given me something I never valued before, my own company. I learned to sit with my thoughts, even when they hurt. I learned that healing doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in thousands of quiet mornings. One evening, while cleaning the shelf, I found an old photograph of us. She was smiling, her hand resting on my shoulder. We looked happy, not because of the mansion or the money, but because we had dreams then. I didn't cry. I just looked at it for a while and then placed it back, not out of bitterness, but respect for what once was. Some memories deserve to rest in peace, too. There were times when I questioned everything. Was I too soft, too blind, too trusting? But with every sunrise, I began to understand that love is not a transaction. It's not measured by what you build together, but by how you treat each other when there's nothing left to gain. She chose wealth over loyalty, comfort over connection. I chose silence, not because I was weak, but because I was done fighting for someone who already left the battlefield. Months went by quietly. People who used to visit the mansion rarely remembered me now. In their eyes, I was the man who lost everything. But I knew something they didn't. Losing everything isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of knowing what truly matters. I had my health, my peace, my name. I didn't need a mansion to define me. I had built that place once from nothing. If needed, I could build peace from nothing again. Life after loss is not about forgetting. It's about forgiving yourself for holding on too long. I stopped asking why she did what she did. I stopped replaying that last day in my head. Every time those thoughts came, I reminded myself, pain is heavy, but peace is light. You just have to choose which one you want to carry. I chose peace. By the time winter came, I had already let go of her name, her voice, her memory. I no longer looked at the mansion road. I started visiting the park nearby, feeding the birds, talking to old strangers who carried their own stories of heartbreak. It felt good to realize I wasn't alone. Everyone loses something in life. Some lose money, some lose people, some lose themselves. I was just lucky to find myself again before it was too late. There were still lonely nights, yes, but they didn't hurt the same anymore. Loneliness became familiar, almost kind. It stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like peace. I realized I didn't miss her. I missed who I thought she was. That illusion had already vanished. The real her, the one who left, belonged to another world, a world that didn't value loyalty. By the end of those months, I had transformed without even noticing. I was no longer the broken man who walked out of the mansion. I was a man who could survive without what once defined him. I no longer feared silence. I understood it. I no longer chased love. I respected it when it came. My scars turned into lessons. My pain turned into wisdom. And slowly, I found myself again, not as a husband, not as a victim, but as a man who learned how to rebuild from ashes. That was my life after loss. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. The kind of healing that doesn't come from revenge or closure, but from the quiet understanding that peace is something you build, brick by brick, inside yourself. And for the first time in a long time, I slept with no bitterness in my heart, only calm, quiet, steady peace. But that morning, the day I signed those papers, that was the day I buried not just a marriage, but a lifetime of dreams. It hurt deeply. Yet somewhere in that pain, a seed of strength began to grow. Because I walked away without shouting, without hate, without revenge. And that silence would soon become my greatest power. It had been many quiet months since the divorce. My days had turned into a pattern of stillness. Wake up early, brew tea, water the plants, take a slow walk to the corner store, and then sit by the window until the sun disappeared behind the rooftops. I didn't expect change anymore. I had made peace with loneliness, almost like an old friend I shared tea with every evening. The house was small but calm, and calmness was something I had not felt in years. I thought the story of my marriage was over, but life, as it often does, had one more chapter left for me to read. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The sky was pale, the kind of color that promises nothing. I was halfway through sweeping the floor when the phone rang. It startled me. It had been weeks since anyone called. I wiped my hands on my shirt and picked up the receiver, expecting maybe a wrong number or some company trying to sell me insurance. But the voice that came through froze me in place. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, deep, weary, and full of age. It was my former father-in-law, the man I used to respect like my own father, the man who hadn't spoken to me since the divorce. He said my name slowly, as if testing if I would hang up. I didn't. He hesitated, then said, "I need to meet you. There's something you should know." His tone was heavy, the kind that carried both guilt and urgency. I didn't ask questions. I simply said yes. Not because I was curious, but because something in his voice felt final, as if he was carrying a burden too big for one man to hold alone. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time. My hands trembled slightly. It had been months since I'd heard anything connected to her family. I thought they had erased me from their lives completely, just like she had. The call stirred something inside me, a mix of old wounds and unanswered questions. What could he possibly want after all this time? Did something happen to her? Was he calling out of pity, or was there something deeper behind his words? That entire day, I couldn't focus. My tea went cold, untouched. I tried to distract myself with cleaning, reading, fixing the same old shelf that didn't need fixing. But my thoughts kept circling back to the phone call. I kept hearing his voice in my head, replaying that same sentence. It's time you know something. Know what? My mind tried to guess, but none of the guesses felt right. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking clock. I remembered the man he once was. Strict, proud, traditional. He never liked weakness, never tolerated failure. During my marriage, he used to praise me for being hardworking, for building a future from nothing. He'd often say I reminded him of himself in his younger days. But when his daughter divorced me, his silence cut deeper than any insult could have. I thought he had taken her side without question. Maybe he had. But now, years later, he wanted to talk. That meant something had changed. By morning, I had convinced myself that maybe he wanted to make peace. Maybe old age had softened him. Or maybe guilt had finally caught up. Whatever the reason, I knew I had to go. Not out of revenge, but out of closure. Some wounds don't heal unless you face them again. The next afternoon, I received another call from him. He told me to meet him in 2 days at a quiet cafe near the old harbor. No one else needs to know, he said. His tone was sharp, serious, but there was also exhaustion in it. The kind that comes from carrying regret for too long. I could hear him breathing heavily, as if each word cost him effort. Before hanging up, he said one more thing. She isn't who you think she was. Then the line went dead. That last sentence haunted me. She isn't who you think she was. What did that even mean? Had she hidden something from me? I had already accepted that she chose money over love, but now I wondered if there was more to it, something darker, something that went beyond greed. The following days were long and uneasy. I didn't tell anyone about the call, not that there was anyone to tell. I just waited, counting hours like a man waiting for judgment. I thought of all the things that could happen at that meeting. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he wanted to give me back something that once belonged to me. Or maybe he simply wanted to talk before leaving this world. He was old now. His health had been fragile even before. I spent those 2 days preparing myself emotionally. I didn't want to go with bitterness in my heart. Whatever he had to say, I would listen with calm. Life had already taught me enough about patience. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw someone older, yes, but also stronger. My hair had turned fully gray, my eyes had lines of tiredness, but my spirit felt steadier than before. I wasn't the broken man she left behind. I was a man who had survived. On the morning of the meeting, I woke before sunrise. I couldn't eat breakfast. My stomach felt tied in knots. I dressed simply. Clean shirt, old watch, black shoes polished just enough to look decent. It wasn't vanity, it was respect. The man I was meeting deserved that. Whatever had gone wrong between us, he had once been family. The walk to the cafe felt longer than it was. Every step seemed to pull old memories out of the shadows. I remembered family dinners, his laughter, the way he used to sit at the head of the table with quiet authority. I remembered how he looked at me the day the divorce papers were signed, disappointed, almost disgusted. That look had haunted me for years. Maybe today would finally erase it. When I reached the cafe, I stood outside for a while. The air smelled of rain and sea salt. The place looked almost forgotten. Wooden chairs, dusty glass windows, a faded sign that said Harbor Cafe. I checked my watch. I was early. I chose a corner seat facing the door, ordered a cup of tea, and waited. My heart beat louder than the rain tapping on the window. As I waited, I thought about how life circles back to unfinished stories. I never imagined I would see him again, let alone hear from him. But deep down, I felt that this meeting was not an accident. Life doesn't bring back people for no reason. Sometimes it sends them back to close the chapter they helped write. Minutes turned into nearly an hour before I saw him. He walked in slowly, his posture weaker than I remembered, his hair thinner and white. Time had aged him deeply. He looked around, saw me, and gave a faint nod. I stood up out of respect. He approached the table, holding something in his hand, a worn brown briefcase. It looked old, maybe older than both of us. His fingers clutched it tightly, like it contained the weight of truth. When he sat down, neither of us spoke at first. The silence between us said more than words could. His eyes looked tired, but honest, filled with something that wasn't anger. Perhaps shame, perhaps sorrow. I could tell he had come not to fight, but to confess. And though I didn't know what he was about to say, I could feel the heaviness of it in the air. Before he even opened his mouth, I knew that call had changed everything. I didn't know what truth he carried in that briefcase, or what story he was about to unfold, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever it was, my life would never be the same after that meeting. And as the rain began to fall harder outside, tapping gently against the window, I realized something. Sometimes closure doesn't come from revenge. It comes from truth finally finding its way back to you, even when it's years late. The rain outside turned heavier, and the sound filled the small cafe like a quiet song of memory. The air smelled of wet wood and coffee beans, and the lights above flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the table where we sat. I looked at him carefully. His face had changed. The sharpness I remembered from years ago was gone. What remained was a softness that only regret can bring. His hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the old briefcase. The lines around his eyes told the story of time, of worry, of something long carried in silence. He didn't speak for a while. Neither did I. There was no rush, no need to fill the air with empty talk. Sometimes silence is the only bridge that connects two people who have both been hurt by the same story. We just sat there, watching the rain. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the cafe wall. It was the same kind of ticking that had filled my empty house for months, steady, cold, and painfully honest. After a few minutes, he finally looked at me. His voice was low and hoarse, as if every word cost him strength. He said my name once, just to make sure I was still there, still willing to listen. Then he said something that made my heart beat faster. "I owe you the truth." He paused again, gripping the handle of the briefcase like a man holding on to his last piece of courage. "You were wronged," he added quietly, "and it's time you know how deep that wrong truly went." I sat still. My hands tightened around the warm cup of tea, but I didn't drink. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear what came next. I thought I had already accepted everything, the betrayal, the loss, the loneliness, but those words brought the old wounds back to life. Yet I didn't interrupt him. Something about his tone told me that this was not just an apology, it was something much bigger. He sighed deeply before continuing. "When she left you," he said slowly, "I didn't stand by you. I believed her words, not yours. I thought you had failed her. I thought you had made her unhappy. But I was wrong." He stopped again, shaking his head. His eyes dropped to the floor as if ashamed to meet mine. "I see it now. She was not the victim. She was the architect of the entire lie." The cafe grew quieter. Even the sound of rain seemed to fade as his words settled between us. I felt my chest tighten. I had dreamed of hearing this truth once, but now that it was being said, it didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy. It felt sad. Because behind every truth like that lies years of misunderstanding, years of wasted kindness, years of being blamed for something you didn't do. He continued, "I found out only months ago. It started with some papers she left behind, financial documents, letters. They showed a side of her I never knew." His voice trembled as he spoke, and I could tell this was painful for him too. "She had been taking money not only from you, but from me as well. She lied about everything, her debts, her business, even her reasons for leaving you. She told me you had hidden wealth from her, that you had betrayed her trust. I believed her. And because I believed her, I turned my back on you. That was my mistake." For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stared at him, my mind trying to piece together what he was saying. The woman I had once built a life with, the one I loved, protected, and trusted, had not only taken my house, but also destroyed my name to cover her own greed. And her father, the man sitting across from me now, had carried that guilt for months, maybe years, without knowing the full truth until recently. He reached for the briefcase slowly. His fingers trembled as he unlatched it, the old metal making a soft click. Then he pushed it gently across the table toward me. "Everything you need to see is inside," he said. His voice broke slightly. "Every lie, every signature, every theft. I wanted you to have it, because what she did, it wasn't just wrong, it was cruel." I didn't open it right away. My eyes stayed fixed on it, the dark leather worn by time, the handle cracked, the corners frayed. It looked ordinary, but I knew that inside it rested the weight of years. I took a deep breath before finally pulling it toward me. The smell of old paper and ink hit me as soon as I lifted the cover. Inside were folders, neatly stacked and bound, each labeled with dates and titles. Property records, bank statements, letters written in her handwriting. I picked up the first one and scanned the lines. My hands began to shake. It was a transfer document, the mansion deed. But it showed something I never knew. She had falsified part of the claim, forging my signature on a secondary document to secure more money from joint accounts. My name had been used against me. I flipped through more papers, each one a piece of the puzzle I never thought I'd see. There were letters between her and her lawyer, planning how to keep me from knowing the full financial picture. There were notes about hidden debts, unpaid taxes, and a mortgage she secretly took in her name using the property I built. I looked up at him. His eyes were red, not from anger, but from sorrow. "She ruined everything," he said softly. "And not just for you. She drained my accounts too. I lost most of what I had saved for my old age. She said it was for investment, but it was all lies. When I confronted her, she ran away. She hasn't spoken to me since." He paused, his voice cracking. "That's when I realized what she had done to you was worse than what she did to me. Because you gave her love, not money, and she destroyed that too." The words hit me like a storm I couldn't prepare for. I felt the kind of pain that doesn't show in tears, but sits quietly in the chest, burning. Yet beneath that pain was something else. Relief. After all those months of wondering why, of blaming myself, of thinking I wasn't enough, I finally knew the truth. It wasn't my failure. It was her choice, her greed, her lies. He leaned back in his chair, looking smaller now, like the years had caught up all at once. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I wanted to give you this." He nodded toward the briefcase. "She left me with nothing but shame. I thought maybe, by giving this to you, I could at least return a bit of the justice she took." I closed the briefcase carefully. My fingers lingered on the leather. I didn't feel anger anymore, just quiet understanding. Life had come full circle in its own strange way. The man who once stood against me was now the one handing me the proof of my innocence. The same man who had turned away from me was now looking at me with eyes full of guilt and apology. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside had softened, turning into a light drizzle. I could see the reflection of the streetlights on the wet pavement, shimmering like faint memories. In that silence, I realized something important. That revenge doesn't always come with shouting or fury. Sometimes it comes softly, through truth revealed at the right time. I finally said quietly, "You did what you thought was right then. And now you're doing what's right again." He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "She fooled us both," he said, almost whispering. "But I'll spend the rest of my days making sure her lies don't live longer than we do." We sat there for another hour, talking in fragments, not about the past we lost, but about the peace we both were finally finding. When he stood to leave, I saw how frail he had become. Yet his steps, though slow, looked lighter than when he walked in. He left me with the briefcase, but also with something I hadn't felt in years. Vindication. Quiet. Calm. And deserved. When he reached the door, he turned once more and looked at me. "She'll have to live with herself now," he said. Then he walked out into the rain. I watched through the window as he disappeared down the street, his figure slowly fading into the mist. I stayed there for a while longer, just listening to the rain and feeling the weight of everything settle in my heart. That day, I realized life doesn't always hand you justice in courtrooms or arguments. Sometimes it delivers it in a small cafe through the shaking voice of an old man holding a worn briefcase. And in that moment, for the first time since she left, I felt free. When I reached home that night, the briefcase sat on my old wooden table. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets every thought echo a little longer than it should. I stared at the case for a long time, the lamplight falling softly across its surface. It looked ordinary, almost forgotten, yet I knew what it carried could change the meaning of my entire past. I didn't rush to open it again. I just sat there, watching the shadows shift over it as the night deepened. The sound of the rain outside had faded into a slow drizzle, and every drop that touched the window seemed to whisper something I had waited years to hear. Truth has come home. I ran my hand over the leather once more. It was old, scratched, and smelled faintly of dust and time. The edges were rough, the handle cracked, and there were faint initials engraved near the clasp. His initials, the father of the woman who once called me her world. I wondered how many years that man had carried this briefcase, how many times he must have opened it in silence, hoping to find peace. And now it was with me, sitting under the same roof where she once promised forever. When I finally opened it again, I took out each document slowly, carefully, like one would handle fragile glass. There were property deeds, financial papers, letters, and sealed envelopes. Some were crisp and new, others were yellowed and torn at the edges. Each piece had a story, a truth, a hidden wound. I laid them across the table in neat rows. My hands trembled as I read, but not from fear, more from disbelief that one person could weave such a web of lies so quietly. The first folder contained property transactions. I saw signatures, mine, hers, and those of lawyers. But beside them, there were hidden amendments, tiny notations, and forged details. She had moved money in secret accounts. She had mortgaged the mansion twice, once behind my back, and again under a fake name that she created using parts of her middle name and initials. It wasn't clever. It was cruel, because she did it not out of need, but out of greed. I turned to the next document, a letter written by her own hand. Her handwriting was unmistakable, neat, curved, with that same confident loop in every Y and G. It was a letter to someone I didn't know, a lawyer in another city. She wrote about her plan to separate from me, about how she would secure the house and assets before filing for divorce. Every line showed that it was never about love ending. It was about money beginning. Reading her words felt like hearing her voice again, but not the voice I used to know. It was colder, sharper, calculating. There were also letters from her father, the man who gave me the briefcase. He had written to her after discovering parts of her scheme. His words were filled with pain and disbelief. He had begged her to stop, to confess, to return what she had taken. But she never did. Those letters were never sent. He had kept them hidden, perhaps too ashamed to reveal them until he had the courage to face me. As I went through the papers, the night grew longer. The clock ticked steadily, its rhythm matching the slow unfolding of the truth. I could feel the years peeling away from my heart, layer by layer, exposing the hurt I had buried deep. Every document reminded me of a different time, our wedding, the housewarming, the anniversaries, the laughter that once filled the mansion. Each memory now had a shadow behind it, a secret that had been living quietly beneath the surface. Then, near the bottom of the pile, I found something unexpected. A small black notebook, old and thin. It wasn't labeled, but when I opened it, I realized it was hers. Inside were numbers, names, bank details, and short notes about transactions. But in between those records were fragments of thoughts, short lines that almost sounded like confessions. Some were written in anger, others in regret. He trusts too much. He doesn't question anything. If only he knew. Each sentence was like a knife, sharp and personal. But one line stood out from the rest. It read, "One day I'll return everything when I find peace." I read it again and again. It was written years ago, in faded ink, long before the divorce. Maybe there was a time when she wanted to stop, when guilt had begun to whisper to her heart. But that day never came. Greed drowned the guilt, pride buried it deeper, and peace never followed her. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For a moment, I could almost see her face again. The way she looked when we first built that mansion, smiling as if dreams were real. I remembered how proud she was when we walked through those hallways, hand in hand. She used to say it wasn't just a house, it was our legacy. I had believed her. Every corner of that mansion held a memory, and now every memory felt tainted. Yet, as I sat there surrounded by papers of deceit, I felt no anger. What replaced it was clarity. I realized that revenge is not always destruction. Sometimes it's revelation. The truth itself becomes the final act of justice. She had taken my mansion, but she had lost something far greater: her father's trust, her peace, her name. I carefully placed every paper back into the briefcase. I wiped the table clean and closed the lid with care, pressing the lock shut until they clicked. The sound echoed softly through the room, like the ending of a long, painful chapter. I sat there for hours after that, not thinking, not planning, just breathing. The next morning, sunlight came through the curtains for the first time in months, and I let it touch my face. It felt different, lighter, warmer. Maybe because for the first time, I didn't carry doubt anymore. I didn't question who was right or wrong. I had seen everything. I had proof of everything. And strangely, I didn't feel the need to show it to the world. Truth doesn't need witnesses. It just needs to exist. I decided to keep the briefcase safe, not as revenge, but as a reminder of what trust costs when given to the wrong person. I placed it in the old trunk at the corner of my room, where I kept other memories, photographs, medals, and a watch she once gifted me. They all sat together now, relics of a past that had finally been put to rest. In the days that followed, I heard from mutual friends that her life had begun to crumble. The mansion she fought for had been sold quietly to pay off debts. She moved from place to place, always trying to rebuild what her lies had destroyed. I didn't smile when I heard it. I didn't celebrate. There is no joy in watching someone you once loved fall. But there is peace in knowing that life took care of what you couldn't. Weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from her father. He wrote to tell me that he had confronted her one last time. She didn't deny any of it. She cried, he said, not because of what she lost, but because of what she couldn't fix. She had wanted to call me, but shame held her back. I folded that letter carefully and kept it inside the briefcase, the last piece of that long, painful story. That night, I sat outside on the porch, watching the stars. The world felt quiet again, the kind of quiet that no longer hurts. The pain had turned into acceptance. I realized that some people never find peace because they keep running from the truth. But when the truth finally finds you, it sets you free. The briefcase didn't just carry papers, it carried closure. It carried the proof that I wasn't the fool I had been made to believe I was. It carried the truth that patience is not weakness. It carried the justice I never had to fight for. And as I looked at the stars that night, I whispered to myself, not in anger, not in sadness, but in calm understanding, that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply to live long enough to see truth walk back to your door on its own. Weeks passed after that night with the briefcase. I began to wake early again, just as I used to when life still had a steady rhythm. The mornings were simple: tea in an old cup, the sound of sparrows near the window, the soft light crawling across the wall. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to rush anywhere. My mind wasn't heavy. My heart wasn't chasing closure anymore. It was already here, sitting quietly beside me. The briefcase had done more than reveal her lies. It had ended my confusion. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate is loud, and I was tired of noise. What replaced it was a slow peace, the kind that grows after long storms. I began to understand that truth doesn't destroy you. It rebuilds you differently. It takes away the illusions and leaves only what's real. And sometimes what's real is small, quiet, and humble, but it's enough to live with dignity. Then, one morning, I received another letter. It came from a lawyer in the city, the same man who had handled some of her cases. The envelope was thin, plain, and carried her name on the back in small handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, there was only one page and a folded document. The letter was short. It said that she had passed away a few weeks ago. Heart failure, sudden and silent. The lawyer wrote that she had left something for me in her will. My hands froze. The folded document was a deed. It was the mansion, my mansion. The same house she once fought so hard to take. The same house she said she deserved. The house I had built brick by brick with dreams and belief. Now it was mine again. No court order, no revenge, no anger, just her final act. I sat in silence for hours. I didn't know how to feel. There was no joy in it, no victory. It didn't feel like a reward. It felt like an echo, as if life had completed a circle. She took it away in greed. It returned in regret. She won the house but lost herself. I lost everything but found peace. In the end, it seemed that both of us received exactly what we had earned. I went back to see the mansion one last time. It looked older, emptier. The paint had peeled, the garden was wild, and the windows were covered in dust. Yet when I stepped inside, I could still hear faint traces of laughter from years ago. I walked through every room slowly, touching the walls, feeling the memories breathe again. It didn't hurt anymore. It felt distant, like watching an old film whose ending you already know. In one corner of the living room, there was still a small mark on the floor, a scratch from the first time we moved furniture together. We had laughed so much that day. I remember her saying it gave the house character. I smiled faintly at that memory, realizing how love can exist in moments, even when it doesn't survive in years. I decided not to live there again. The house no longer felt like home. It was a monument of lessons, not comfort. So, I gave it away, to a foundation that helped elderly people without shelter. It felt right. A house built on broken trust should rebuild other lives, not trap me in its history. The lawyer was surprised when I told him. But I knew what I was doing. I had lived long enough to understand that holding on to things doesn't heal you. Letting go does. When I walked out for the last time, I didn't look back. The air outside felt warm, almost forgiving. I realized that everything I once thought I lost, dignity, peace, hope, was never truly gone. It was only waiting for the noise to stop. I returned to my small cottage that evening, sat on the porch, and watched the sun melt into the horizon. It was quiet again, but this time, it was a good quiet, a peaceful kind. I took the briefcase, now lighter in meaning, and placed it under my chair. I didn't need to open it anymore. The truth had already spoken. As darkness fell, I thought of her, not as the woman who betrayed me, but as the person who once loved me before the greed began. Maybe she had realized too late what she had done. Maybe the briefcase from her father and the mansion in her will were her ways of saying sorry. I would never know for sure. But I decided to believe it was. Life has strange ways of balancing things. Sometimes it doesn't do it in front of you. Sometimes it waits for silence, for time, for your heart to calm. Then, quietly, without warning, it returns what you lost. Not because you fought for it, but because you finally learned to let it go. That is the twist the world gives you when you least expect it. That night, as I watched the stars again, I whispered the same words that had carried me through my darkest days. Peace doesn't come when you win. It comes when you stop needing to. And for the first time, I felt them truly sink in. I took a sheet of paper from my old desk the next morning. The paper was yellowed at the edges, and the pen I used had a worn tip, but I knew this letter would be the last I ever wrote to her. I didn't plan to send it. I wasn't writing to change her mind or to seek forgiveness. I was writing to release myself, to close a door that had stayed open far too long. I began with no plan, just words. My hand moved slowly, as if the pen was remembering the years we spent together. I wrote about the house we built, how every brick was filled with dreams and laughter. I wrote about the years we shared before greed and pride turned those bricks to dust between us. I told her how I felt the day she walked away, how her voice seemed quieter after she left, and how my home became colder without her. I wrote about the day her father gave me the briefcase, how the documents inside were more than just paper, they were proof. Proof that truth has a way of finding its way to the light, even after years of darkness. I wrote about the mansion, how she took it in pride and left it in silence, how I gave it away not out of revenge, but out of peace, so it could serve others instead of holding my pain. Then I wrote about the silence, how silence became my teacher, showing me that respect cannot be demanded, only lived. That dignity is not in keeping what you lose, but in knowing how to walk away without bitterness. I wrote about the mornings I spent sitting quietly on my porch, watching the sun rise, listening to the birds, and feeling a calm I had not known for years. I told her that I forgave her, not because she asked for it, but because I needed to. Forgiveness is not a gift for the other person, it is a gift to yourself. I forgave her for throwing away the life we promised each other, for letting money and pride change her heart. I forgave her for taking the mansion, for breaking me, and for walking away. But most of all, I forgave her for reminding me what I truly valued. I wrote that I learned a truth that no money or property could give. Peace comes when you let go of needing to be right, when you accept what is, and when you stop holding on to the hurt. I told her that her actions, as cruel as they seemed, gave me something greater than any house or fortune could offer: freedom. I was free from anger, from expectation, from bitterness. I was free to live the rest of my days quietly, in peace. At the end of the letter, I wrote simply, "I will not send this letter. It is not for you to read, it is for me, so I can live my days without carrying the weight of what was lost. I will not hate you. I will not beg for what is gone. I will live quietly with the dignity you took away but could never destroy." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. I never looked at it again. It became a small, silent monument to the lesson I learned, that life is not about the things we keep, but about how we keep ourselves when things are taken away. The next day, I walked into the garden and let the wind carry my thoughts. The flowers were blooming quietly, not caring who saw them. They existed in their own peace. I realized then that peace is like that flower. It blooms quietly when the heart stops holding on too tightly. From that day on, I stopped measuring life by what I lost. I began to measure it by what I still had: my health, my memories, my dignity. I stopped asking why things happened and started asking what I could learn from them. And slowly, in the quiet of my mornings, I began to heal. Now, as an old man looking back, I know that letter was the last conversation I ever needed to have with her. Not because she could have read it, but because I had read it to myself. And once I had, the chapter was closed. I still keep that paper in my drawer, not out of pain, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the lesson, for the journey, and for the quiet peace I found at the end. Peace that no house, no fortune, no betrayal could take from me. Peace that was mine the moment I chose to let go. And so, I walk forward in my days without looking back, carrying only the quiet truth that I have learned, that the deepest form of revenge is not to return cruelty with cruelty, but to live on with dignity, silence, and peace. That letter will never be sent, but I will carry it with me forever. It is the testament of a man who lost everything, but found something far greater. And in that silence, I finally found home. Now, as an old man, I tell this story not to reopen wounds, but to share what life taught me. I tell it quietly, without anger, without pride, but with clarity that only years can give. I tell it so that those who listen may understand something I learned the hard way, that respect and dignity are worth far more than any home, fortune, or possession. They cannot be bought, taken, or given. They are lived and kept, quietly, in the heart. I remember clearly the day she walked away with the mansion, the day her father handed me the briefcase, and the moment I decided to write the letter I never sent. Every detail is etched into my memory. I remember the ache of betrayal, the sting of loss, and the strange calm that came after the storm. It was not peace at first. Peace came later, when I stopped asking why and started asking, what now? I learned that life is not measured in years, nor in wealth, but in how you respond when life takes something from you. My response was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was quiet. I let the silence speak louder than any confrontation ever could. I let the truth unfold without forcing it. I let time do its work, and in time, I found that silence had its own justice. I reflect now on the nature of revenge. At first, I thought revenge meant taking something back, making them pay for what they did. But I have since learned that true revenge is something much deeper. True revenge is living without them controlling your heart, without them holding power over your peace. It is choosing not to allow the wrong done to you to change who you are at your core. Revenge is peace, in the end. That briefcase her father gave me, it was not just a collection of papers. It was a symbol. It was proof that truth will find its way to you if you wait, even when years pass and wounds feel too deep to heal. And more than that, it was proof that sometimes life returns what was lost in ways we cannot imagine. I did not chase it. I did not demand it. I let it come quietly. I have told my children and grandchildren this story many times now. I tell it so they may understand that wealth and property are fleeting, but dignity is eternal. I tell it so they may remember that silence can be louder than words, that patience can be stronger than anger, and that forgiveness can be more powerful than revenge. I tell it so they may carry forward a different way of living, one that values peace over possession, respect over resentment. I think often about her. I do not hate her. I do not wish her pain. I wish only that she understands the lesson she gave me, whether she accepts it or not. I wish she could know that by taking the mansion, she also gave me something far greater, a lesson in letting go, a deeper understanding of peace, and a story that will last far beyond her name or mine. In my quiet hours, I still walk past the empty space where the mansion once stood in my life. I see it in my mind, not as a loss, but as a chapter that ended so another could begin, a chapter that taught me that even in the deepest betrayal, there is room for grace. Even in the sharpest heartbreak, there is room for healing. Even when all seems lost, there is room for peace. Now, I carry that peace as my greatest possession. I keep it like a treasure hidden not in walls or safes, but in the quiet corners of my heart. I keep it in the way I speak softly to myself in the mornings, in the way I watch the sunrise without rush, and in the way I walk without regret. I keep it in the truth that the only thing truly mine is the peace I choose to keep. And so I tell this story not to seek sympathy or applause, but so that others may know. Betrayal is not the end of the road. It is the beginning of a new path, one that can lead to deeper understanding if you choose it. That path is not easy, it is quiet, and it asks for patience, but it leads to something worth having, a heart free of anger, a soul free of regret, and a life lived with quiet dignity. I tell this story now because I want those who hear it to remember one truth above all else. Life will give and life will take, but how you respond defines your peace. You can choose bitterness, or you can choose silence. You can choose to hold on to what is gone, or you can choose to hold on to what remains, the dignity of who you are. My final thought, after all these years, is this. She took my mansion, but I walked away with something she could never take from me. My peace, my silence, and the quiet knowledge that I have lived my last years without anger in my heart. I have lived my days with dignity and tact, and that is the greatest victory I could ever claim. And so I close this chapter of my life, not with noise, not with vengeance, but with peace. That peace is my last word, my final story, and my enduring gift to myself.